we have our regular hosts online, Colade and KD. Actually, that's the same person.
Said I'm writing you this letter and letting you know that my brother, he go better, he done better. Oh, na, 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 na. I'm writing you this letter and letting you know that my sister, he go better, he done better. Oh.
This is episode 10 of the Better Informed Immigrant podcast, and we have our regular host online, Kola and Kolade. Kolade usually goes by KD. I think sometime Kevin Durant is going to reach out to us and ask us to stop using his trademark. I'm looking at Kolade right now. We're on Zoom, we're recording, and he has this professional setup that I've been teasing him about. He has a mic on there, he has the headphones in place. Last time we did an episode, I think it was on the iPhone, and I was always wondering why his audio quality is always better than mine. So I finally found out the secret. He's been using some high-tech equipment, but hiding it off camera, so I couldn't say it. So he's with us, and then we also have a guest we're going to introduce in a few minutes. But Kolade, what's going on? I thought we are like brothers. You're supposed to tell me if you're doing something good. I'm supposed to benefit from this. Not that you're trying to show me up.
I actually didn't know this was a secret. I thought it's been obvious all along. For as long as I've been using this, I've never had the webcam. So this is the first time that I was able to plug a webcam to the desktop. Because to use this setup, I have to use the desktop. And to use this desktop, I don't have a webcam. So I finally got a Logitech webcam, which is what I just plugged in to be able to. So it wasn't intentional.
You know the funny thing about this whole thing when you're talking about with the webcam and whatnot. So we ended up, well, I should say I ended up buying like $8,000 worth of equipment to do a podcast that we are not using any of that pieces of equipment. We're using zero.
Yeah.
I'm going to buy additional equipment to finally do the podcast. So we have $8,000 worth of equipment that we're still trying to sell. So I may even ask you about that. We may talk a little bit about that and see what's going on there. But before we dive into that conversation, let's bring on our guest, our brother, Aura is online. He's looking handsome today. We're not quite sure why he decided to come online, but we're going to grill him on the podcast and learn a little bit about what he's been doing and how he's been thinking about it. Aura, would you mind just coming on and telling our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do and what are some of the things you're thinking about?
Yeah, of course. First of all, let me just thank you both for having me on the podcast. Looking forward to the conversation we're going to have today. But a little bit about myself. I grew up in Nigeria till the age of 13. So I'm what you call someone that skipped a lot of grades. So during my childhood days, some teachers presumed I was very smart, and I ended up skipping a lot of grades. And by the age of 13, I ended up graduating from high school and moving over to the US. And from there, I transitioned into what I'm doing right now over the course of the next 10 years or 9 years. So that's a general overview of my journey. Left Nigeria when I was 13, and I've spent about 13 years in the United States. So you could say I spent 50% of my life in Nigeria and 50% of my life in America.
That's interesting. So, two questions for you to start with. Number one is, where were you in Nigeria? Were you in Lagos or were you someplace else in the country?
I was born in Lagos. Then we ended up moving to Ogun State, Abeokuta region. And that's where I pretty much finished my education.
Okay. And then the second question would be, when you came to the US, academically, what did you end up doing? Did you end up going back to high school? Did you go to college directly? Like, how did you maneuver since you already had a high school diploma already in Nigeria?
Yeah, so it was very weird because as soon as I came to the US and I told them I was 13 and I wanted to go to college, the plan was I already have a high school diploma. I should be going to college. But when you get to the United States, you're going to realize that a lot of 13-year-old boys are still in high school. They're just starting high school, actually. So it was a little bit of an awkward conversation trying to explain to people that I'm supposed to be going to college.
Mm-hmm.
And when we moved over to the country, to the United States, we were still trying to figure things out. So the advice we were given was put him in high school and let him get used to the culture, the environment. And from there, you can transition over to college. It wasn't like I was taking a step back because everyone my age was in that grade level. So I just went straight back to high school, and that's exactly what happened.
So I'm trying to think, actually. 13s, are they in high school in the US or are they in middle school?
It depends on the child, but from most, the goal is for the child to graduate around 18, 19, right? So 13, some of them were in middle school, some of them were in high school, but it just made sense for me to start the first year of high school. There was no way I was going back to middle school. I already have a high school diploma, so I decided to start first year of high school.
So I don't know how it works in other countries in the West, but what you said about high school and ages seems to be a thing that happens in the US, right? When you have kids or young individuals that, let us say, gifted academically, what ends up happening, instead of them graduating early, they end up taking AP classes and things like that, right? But you don't really see a situation where somebody graduates early in the US. I'm sure it exists, but I'm sure it's very rare. And to be honest, given that you came from a different country, the first thing that the folks that are at the school are thinking about is going to be, number one, they don't know anything about Nigeria, right? That's the first thing. So they were thinking you're probably going to fall into that bucket of the immigrants. How do we fit you into English as second language classes or things like that? Because they're not informed. It's not that they're trying to diminish your abilities, just they don't know your situation and they deal with immigrants across the whole spectrum, right? A lot of them need those classes. That was interesting to kind of see how that was. And I was also thinking about one more thing. So my situation was a little different from yours. I think I got my high school diploma when I was 15 and I came to the US when I was 16, right? And I ended up going to community college. But in retrospect, I think if I were to do it all over again, I probably would have gone to high school. And the reason why I say that is not necessarily because of the academics portion of it, but because I think if you go to high school, you have better access to the academic opportunities with scholarships and things like that. There's more of a structure in place to help you with those kind of things. So if you go to community college, there is some structure there, but it's not as well organized as going to a high school system. So I'll be curious to know, like, what did you think when you were in high school and going through that process again for, let us say, for the second time? And what did you think about like the resources that were available to challenge you academically, number one, but to also help you with the financial aspects of college, because you already knew you were going to go to college at some point?
Right. And that's a great point you brought up, because when I first came to high school in the United States, you could make the argument that they were not informed about our educational system. But I beg to differ, because after 2 years in the American school system, you're going to realize that a lot of Nigerian kids, if they came directly into the United States, they're going to blow a lot of these kids out of the park. And the second part was, after 2 years in the school system, there are these Asian Americans that also follow the same process. They come into the country as immigrants, they sign up for high school, but they get a different treatment. They get put in the AP classes immediately. I remember sitting next to this Asian kid. He's from China, and I was explaining to him that he's going to go through the same process that I went through when I first came into the high school. And he was asking me, so why was I put in the AP class? And I couldn't give him an answer. I was put in the remedial English, I need to catch up class. And he was trying to understand why they put him in an AP class. And the conclusion we both came to was maybe it's because of his culture, because he's Chinese, and a lot of kids that are really smart fall into that category. So that's the first part. So I wouldn't say they're not informed. I think they're just going off based on what they've seen so far. America does not really separate between Nigerians, Ghanaians, South Africans. They don't really do that. So once you come in, they're like, okay, so what have we seen in the past? And that's how they go with this other group. And I think that's how they made that decision. They were not as informed, but I think that was the reasoning behind those two students, me and the Chinese kid that came into the school. But overall, I would say the systems in place were really beneficial, because it's a lot to take in. Even if you've been through the high school system, it's a different environment, it's a different culture. The kids, they're not aware of what you know or what you've been through. They just think you're just another kid, and you literally have to go through the same exact high school experience, but at a different pace with the new kids you're supposed to socialize with. But the systems are there versus college, because college is kind of like you're on your own, you're an adult, this is what you have to do. If you can't figure it out, you're going to realize it in 3 months. In high school, if they put you in a remedial class like I did, they're watching you every week, how you're trying to, how you're keeping up with the educational system and how you're socializing. So I will say there was more of a support in high school versus going to community college or just going straight to college.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. So two things come to mind, right? So some people say that Asians are the model minority, right? And therefore they get, let's just call it special treatment, right? Or they get let's just call it the positive aspects of a stereotype. The other thing I would also say, this has been my experience, right? So this is probably a number of years ago, but I used to live on the eastern side of Connecticut, and they had essentially a Chinese school, right? So this were a bunch of Chinese families that came together and created a community, right? And they rented out a whole school on Sunday, and they were teaching their kids Chinese language language and culture and things like that. And I think one of the things that they benefit from is because they are able to come together as a community, they are able to have an influence, whether it is in the academic school system or in policy, because they are talking as a community versus the African parents. I'm going to use Nigeria as an example, right? When I was growing up in Nigeria, your parents didn't necessarily get involved in your education unless something went wrong, right? African parents, in my opinion, may not necessarily be as engaged in that aspect or know that they needed to be engaged, right? Because they're kind of looking at it from the perspective of what they did back on the continent, right? Which here is a different system. And when they get told by the teacher or the counselor or whatever that says, hey, we think your kid should go here or there, they don't necessarily challenge that to say, no, my kid is better than that. Their perspective is if the teacher or counselor is informed and is doing what they think is best for the child, let the child just go through that process. I guess what I'll be interested in knowing is, so you got assigned these classes in the beginning and you talked about you were being monitored and things like that. Did they make changes to your curriculum after they saw how you were performing in those classes?
Yes, and of course they did. They had to. They had no choice at that point. Once you start getting A's in these classes, then the next step is for you to move on to a higher level class. They had no choice but to move me to a higher or faster paced class. But I just want to touch upon something you mentioned, how the African parent doesn't really take a huge role when it comes to the child's education. I think it goes back to the question you had about, did you have a support system when you were in high school versus college? Because the biggest perspective shift for me once I came to America was I had time to play sports. When I was in Nigeria, after school, you go home. You can play soccer for a few minutes, but that's it. You go home. There are no systems in place. I used to have this conversation. I said, maybe it's because we're always thinking about what's tomorrow going to be. Is there going to be food tomorrow? Are we going to be making money? Are we always thinking about survival? And there are no systems in place for us to enjoy life. Once you come to America, there are systems in place for you to enjoy life. It's only in America I've heard someone say, oh, I just want to create an event so I can leave the house. Well, when you go back to Nigeria, you leave the house to go make money. That's the end of it. There's no such thing as going out to go socialize because you want to socialize. You're going out to spend money because you feel bored. No, you go out to spend money so that you can bring more money to your family back home. So these systems are not there. So when you take those same systems back to the school system, there are buses that take kids to their houses. They're not just school buses, regular town buses that take you to your house after school. So you could just literally stay after school for as long as you want and do all of that. There are after school programs that are completely free that parents can sign their kids up for and be more educated about what they're doing at no cost. If you go to Nigeria and talk about after school program, you must be paying out of your pockets. So as soon as you start asking people to pay, and then a lot of people don't want to participate. And if the group is not participating, only a few people participate, then it's literally not a system. It's just a select few people that are benefiting from it. I will say the system is part of the problem, but once you have a system, then things start going in the positive direction.
Okay.
I want to quickly add that the typical African parent that makes their way out to either the US or any other foreign country, they're just happy that their kid is here. So whatever class you put that kid, they don't really care. And I don't think it's more of them not being engaged or looking for ways to come together as a community. It's just that we have this mindset that we made it out here. Whatever they deal us with, we have that spirit to overcome it. Or
survival.
It doesn't matter if one kid had a better chance than us. We just always believe that because of where we're coming from, this is still the best situation that we could ever ask for. And we just forget about everything else. We don't go into the details to say, hey, is this actually the right information or is this the right decision for my kid at this point in time? We just say, well, boy, you're in school. Just go to school, man. And keep it going. So I think that's where we're different. Now, I don't know if that's the case for an Asian parent. I don't know if they have that same level of survival mentality when they come here and feel like we have to survive, or they feel like they had a better system too over there in their country. And maybe what they're lacking over there is not what they're lacking here. And it's just basically there's no difference for them, or I don't really know from that perspective.
Think about that. Like, you brought up a really interesting point. So two things come to mind. The first one would be, if you look at the Asian parents, right? You see so many examples of the Asian parents come over here, they either set up a Chinese restaurant or they are working only God knows how many hours, right? And their kids go to school and the kids come back to the restaurant because there's nobody home. So these people work just as hard as the African immigrants. They don't necessarily have anything given to them. But for some reason, I don't know how, I think that they find a way, and maybe it's the community, maybe it's not. I don't know. I'm not really tied into that community. They find a way to still be engaged in those things for the kids. Whereas the African parents, what you said is completely right? Number one is, oh, we left that situation back home. Anything here is better. That's number one. Maybe that's that mentality. Number two is they're now here, similar to what Aurel was talking about regarding the education system. They are facing the same thing as far as work opportunities are concerned. They have to feed mouths of their kids and they have to live, they have to pay rent, they have to do all this other things. So they are more concerned about figuring out how to make a living. So you cannot fault them for saying, hey, I don't necessarily have the bandwidth right now to go deal with going to the school and having a conversation with the counselor about what classes are being taken, because I just came from my third job before I went to school this morning. It would be interesting. We have to see who's in our network is Asian to see if we can bring them on and glean some lessons from their community and how they take care of this kind of issues. That's kind of an interesting perspective that I never really thought about until you brought it up.
Yeah, it's an unusual one. And I'll give you one more example. How the cultures and the systems they have in place is so different. And that could be why our results are so different. For example, you come to America and they tell you, what do you eat? What's a balanced diet? The Americans would tell you, well, 50% of your plate, if you have a flat plate, 50% of your plate has to be vegetable. See the rice we have in Nigeria that fills the plate? That's supposed to be a cup, right? You see what I'm saying? But if you go over to the Asian culture, it's almost flipped. The Asian culture is the vegetables and the meat are 50% of the plate. The rice is still small. So they still follow the same process. They have like these rice balls and they have the meat and the vegetable mixed. When you come over to the African culture, the rice is the bigger portion, then the meat, they fill out whatever is left. So there's different eating styles, there's different systems might end up creating different results in each community. So you can see people, depending on what they eat, they have different sizes based on where they're coming from. So these systems that they already have in place in their culture, I think plays a major role in the results they get when they come to America or when they go somewhere else.
You know, I never really noticed what you just explained. I was just thinking about it when you're talking about the Asian diet, right? Most of my experience with the Asian diet is going to be like Chinese food, right? Obviously, I've tried Japanese food and all that kind of stuff, but I would say mostly Chinese food has been my, and I'm sure that the Chinese food is probably adapted to like the American palate and it is the Chinese palate. So there's probably some modifications there. But even when you're buying like the lunch special, and I was thinking about that when you're talking, right? When you're buying the lunch special, it's usually about half rice, half meat, or meat and vegetables, right? It's not necessarily, you know, so it's about half and half. I never noticed that before, right? But I'm sure if you went to the Nigeria, somebody gave you half and four, half rice, you're going to say, what is going on?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Different culture, different systems probably could lead to different results. I don't know, but I noticed that, which is something that it just struck me as, wow.
That's interesting. I have to keep that in mind. All right. So you go to high school, right? So you're in these classes, they see your performance, they move you to more rigorous classes. You go through the high school journey, you graduate, and then you go off to college. Which college did you go to and what did you study?
I went to the University of Connecticut, UConn, Huskies, and I studied mechanical engineering.
Oh, you're a Husky. I didn't know this. If I knew this. Oh, you were
I'm a Husky, yes.
Yeah, is it E2? You were in the E2 building?
Yes, I was. That's mostly where all my classes were because that was mainly what the mechanical engineers were taking, E2 building. And I was part of a lot of organizations that use that building as well.
Okay. What are some of the organizations that you were part of?
So I was part of an organization called Bridge. It was more of an organization to bridge the gap between African Americans going into Stanfield versus their white counterpart. So they tried their best to give us a head start. So during the summer before we joined college, they put us through these rigorous courses because, like I said, there is this idea of, this is obviously probably based on past results, that the African American kid needs a lot of support to catch up to the white American kid. Or the argument could be made that the African American kid is going through so much stuff that now they're behind and we need to bring them back up. So that's one of the programs that was initiated. So we literally go through all the AP classes you went through in high school. We try to do that in 2-3 months for these kids so that when they come in their freshman year, they don't seem overwhelmed because you're basically an adult once you get to college. No one's going to be chasing you around.
So I actually went to UConn as well, but I came in again as a transfer student. I spent most of my time in ITEB, the ITE building. It was a newer building at the time, so that was pretty nice. Compared to E2, anything is new.
Right,
anything is new. But but I kind of understand. And I didn't necessarily take advantage of the clubs in college or the clubs organizations in college as well as you did. If I were to do it all over again, I may have done it differently. I didn't know that I should take advantage of those things. It just seemed like a distraction to me at the time. But apart from that organization that you mentioned, which other ones were you a part of?
I was a part of NSBE, which is National Society of Black Engineers, and their mission is just to increase the number of Black engineers in the workforce. And they do a lot of events. They partner with a lot of engineering organizations, Sikorsky, Lockheed Martin, Electric Boat, and develop these long-standing relationships where we try to build a channel so we can just transfer certain students qualified into those positions at those companies. So that was one of the organizations I was a part of. One other organization I was very proud of, which was the presentation team. I felt like before I left college, I wanted to acquire one more skill, which was public speaking. So I joined the engineering presentation team, or they call them the engineering ambassadors. And what we did was we went around Connecticut, high schools, middle schools, and gave engineering presentations. Sometimes we targeted minority areas where, they don't have a lot of exposure to STEM. Sometimes it just didn't matter, but our goal was to just spread STEM awareness across Connecticut middle school and high school.
That's a good point. So we'll be talking about STEM. We should probably define that. And I don't really remember. Actually, I think the M is mathematics, right? So it's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. That those careers in that field versus doing something more in like the humanities or other kind of areas. Did I define that correctly? Is the M
correct? Yes,
mathematics?
that is correct.
Okay, yeah,
that is correct.
Great. Yeah, like what you're saying is for some of these kids, depending on where you are in the US, you have places where people are, well, they're doing okay, right? You have okay areas, you have places that are not so okay, right? And they may not necessarily have an exposure to people that are professionals. That's number one. And number two is people that are in those fields, because those fields have been shown to have, at least in the beginning, a higher salary compared to other fields that people could go into, right? And that may be something that somebody wants to consider if they're going forward. So that's a really good point. I guess one question I had for you is, how did you know to maximize the education at UConn? What I mean by that is, simply as if the education for you were not just the classes you were taking and pursuing that mechanical engineering degree. It was also doing all of these so-called extracurricular activities to ground you up as a professional, as an individual. Yeah, you talked about the engineering presentation club or the engineering ambassadors club, which was more focused on doing this public speaking events. Who told you to go do those kind of things? Like, how did you figure it out?
I don't know exactly what it is, but when your parents discipline you and tell you not to go back to some place, and if you go back to that place, you just remember the discipline you got from your parents. Yeah, so I will say I went through a lot of challenges and pain trying to learn about myself. And the more pain I went through, the more I realized that I was lacking in certain areas, right? So if I'm not able to do a certain thing, if I'm sweating, my heart feels like it's going to stop when someone literally asks me to talk about a subject in front of an audience, I just knew I cannot do this for the next 10 years. So the pain I went through was what was motivating me to go in that direction. I'm what you call, I literally go to where I'm feeling the most pain or where I feel it's the hardest path, because once you overcome that path, you literally just become a better person. It's like the ingredient. Once you get a little bit of that pain, you know that, okay, this is God trying to teach me a lesson. This is life trying to explain to me that this is where I need to get better at. This is where I'm weak at. So I think that was the biggest mindset shift for me, that the pain was a teacher for me. So wherever I felt like I was lacking, wherever I felt the most pain is where I went.
Really good point. KD, one thing I was thinking about goes back to something Ore said earlier when we were talking about the high school journey. We were talking about how there were resources available. In that example, you were talking about resources for after school events and things like that. But one of the things I think is very good in the West, I would say in general, is that there are always resources available to help you grow as an individual, right? We were talking about some of these clubs in college, but even if you were not in college, right? If you're talking about presentation and public speaking, you have Toastmasters, which is essentially free, right? I think you pay $20 to buy the booklet, but it's free, and you get to practice public speaking. They give you like a workbook. They also teach you how to write, I think. So some of these things are really nice versus back home, speaking Nigeria specifically, some of these resources don't necessarily exist. And like Aura was saying earlier, even if they did exist, right, the moment I tell you to start paying for the thing, nobody's interested. Like, how do we encourage the creation or the successful operation of some of these organizations on the continent?
Well, that's a great point you brought up. And it's quite interesting too, because just this past Friday, we went to the park with the kids. And my mom recently joined us from Nigeria a few months ago, was there with us. And she was just surprised by the fact that we could just leave our house and go to some big park somewhere and just do whatever. There was like a playground for the kids. It's this big field. We can play soccer, do whatever we want. And she's wondering, like, why don't we have something like that over there back home? And I was explaining to her that, well, the politicians, because that's where we start from every time. Politicians that would invest in things like this would rather keep the money in their own pocket, because it's not that hard to find a piece of land. We have that. It's not hard. It's just being able to then invest in that and not make the money back is what is affecting us as a people. We just don't think that during my tenure, if I put money to invest into something like this that would serve people long term and I don't make money back from it, then it's not what me being here. Like, I've spent so much money to be here already. And I think that also affects the ability of organizations to get into it. Because when you as an organization decide, I want to do something like this, you still have to go through these bodies and all these departments to get it done. And this same department, because they don't have the mindset to do it, they think you have an ulterior motive. So they're basically asking you, well, are you going to pay us? You know, imagine you're trying to do something to help a people. So the department that should be in charge of something like that, and they're asking you if you're going to pay them to do what you're planning to do, because they think that you trying to do it means you have this long-term goal of how it's going to pay you back, that it could never be from like the goodness of your heart, that you just want to spend millions of naira, for example, to just go invest and create a playground. Because they might say, well, a year from now, you might wake up one day and say you want to start charging money for people to go in there. So why not pay us that money now so you have the freedom to do it in the future? You know, so it just makes everything so convoluted that you start to wonder, why even try? So, you know, why even try? Now, sometimes people do this where they tell politicians that, oh, let's use this to help you with your campaign. Maybe they can vote you in. Sometimes when they do it from that perspective, it could work, because they might think, well, we would say you're the one sponsoring it, not us, but still it's our money. So it's not an easy thing to do over there. There's just too many hurdles you have to climb. And I think, Ori, you were going to say something?
I was going to say, I completely agree with you there. It's a huge problem, but I don't even know what the solution is, but I do know where we can start, right? It's these communities that we can build, these small systems, because it's not just the government itself. It's even the regular person you meet on the street is going to be asking you for something before you can even move to the next step. So it's all in the entire population. So I think they have to start somewhere, but I don't think it's going to start from the top, which is the big government. I doubt it, but if that's possible, that would be a great change. But I think it's going to start from the bottom and work its way to the top.
I don't know. We'll see. You know, what would be interesting is hopefully we get to live very long lives and we get to see how things evolve, right? And that would be interesting to kind of see how change begins to happen. So that's, I guess, all right. Moving on from this. So you graduated from UConn. Did you go into the workforce? Did you go for grad school?
I went straight into the workforce. After my 4 years of college, I felt like I had accomplished what I wanted to accomplish in college in my 4 years. I did not think I needed another 10 years of education to do what I wanted to do. So I just said, you know what? I need to get some sort of experience. I need to understand business. I need to understand how the world works, because I will tell you, college life is definitely different from the real world. And as soon as I tasted that, I said, you know, let me just go out there and see, make some mistakes and see where I fall.
Which industry did you end up going into?
That is a great question, because I ended up stumbling and falling, and I ended up in the finance industry.
Oh, tell me a little bit about that, because I'm interested, right? Obviously, you and I have met at least once before, and you told me you were in the finance industry. And I was very surprised when you told me that you studied mechanical engineering, because typically, I think that, and this has been my experience, I'm not necessarily well informed, but most engineers end up going into engineering. They don't necessarily go into finance. The people that do go into finance go down the route of getting an MBA and then use that as a stepping stone to get into finance. So I'm a little interested in how you go from basically an undergraduate degree in engineering to finance. That's a pretty interesting thing. I'm interested in figuring out how you did that. One more thing, sorry. And was that planned? I guess that's the next question.
Yeah, so I'll answer the second question first. It was not planned. I don't even think anything anything is planned at this point because that's literally how life works. So you try to follow a plan and the next thing you know, something happens. But I fell into the finance industry due to the multiple internships I experienced in my college career. My first internship was a scam. It was a door-to-door sales job. They said, oh, we're going to fly you in. We're going to give you a 5-star hotel. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. I got there and everything was a lie. But I was there already. So I said, let me learn because I've never done door-to-door sales before. And if you read a lot of successful businessmen and salespeople, they went through door-to-door. Door-to-door sales is like it's like the NYSC of, you know, just run through it before you go into the real world. You need to go through that military training. And I did it for like 4 months and I came back. I did another internship and all of these internships kept falling into financial industries. Not by choice. First one got scammed. The second one, it was the only one I had. And I just ended up rolling into finance. Maybe that's what God wanted me to go. I have no clue, but I just ended up landing financial internship. So by the time I graduated, I had to make a choice. I said, I got my 4-year mechanical engineering degree. That's all I wanted from college and some other stuff with it. So what do I want to do now? And I was literally just sitting in my house and I got a call saying, would you be interested in X and Y company? I said, oh, okay. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do next, but so be it. And I just went to this financial firm that I'm currently working at. That's how I got into the financial industry via the different situations that came up.
This is interesting, right? So the value of internships, I think that's pretty key. I was like, I didn't take advantage of it as well as I should have, but I think it's very valuable because it allows you to understand two things. Number one, what you were saying earlier about the fact that there's a difference between being in college and in that academic setting versus the real world and being in the workforce. And an internship gives you a glimpse of that in bite-sized chunks that you can take. That's the first thing. Number two is that it could be a really great stepping stone to opportunities in the future, right? If you hadn't done those internships, you may not have been available to be able to step into the door that opened up when you graduated. I think that was another thing. And then the last thing I wanted to say was really like the mindset is also interesting too, right? Somebody else would have said, oh, you know what? I got all the way here. This internship is a scam. You guys fooled me. I'm so upset. I'm going to go back home and basically do nothing, right? For that summer. You say, you know what? I'm there. Yes, it's a scam. But sure, let's learn the field skills while we're here, right? And it ends up being that the
Nigeria,
skill was really...
last.
I was broke too.
valuable.
I was broke. There's no choice. There's no going back.
No, like that's interesting though. You know, Kolade, let me ask you this question because I think you may know more than the both of us. Do you know whether or not they have internships in Nigeria? I know we have the NYSC, which I guess you could call it kind of an internship, but usually it's not. It's really more like civil service than it is an internship.
We have another scam. Is what we have.
Tell me.
Oh my goodness. Someone actually came online, I think this was last month, ranting and saying, if you're going to do internship, make sure you get all the details before they start to tell you to go and wash clothes in the house. Before madam would say, hey, go and carry my kids from school. Like, this part of my internship. Oh my goodness. So we don't have a structure. Although I would say multinationals and bigger companies, they might at least have a good structure. But typically, mostly small businesses, when they tell you you're coming to do internship, just know there's a whole lot added to that. It's just that we have seen can't pay you full salary, but you're going to do a salary job.
But I say, go wash the dishes, go wash. Oh my Lord. Okay. Oh, let's get back on topic. That you make me laugh so hard. I can't stop. So, all right. I want to ask a question. So, when you said somebody gave you a call and say, are you going to be interested in XYZ company? So, this person that gave you a call, was that based on the relationship you had before, from either one of the internships or from college, or was that based on you doing essentially, you know, putting your resume out on those job sites and things like that, and then they gave you a call as a result of that?
Yes, I will say based on the actions I took over the course of my 4 years, which is get on as many job-related websites. So I would not be able to find certain website if I have not gone through those processes of trying to find an internship, trying to find, you know, some sort of job after college. And I wasn't even looking at is what makes that situation so unique. I was just trying to figure out, so what do I want to do next? And because I've already put myself out there, they've seen my profile and they said this person would be a good fit for this job. And they gave me a call called.
That's really good. We're going to do a podcast in the future. I'm not sure when, but we're going to do one about, I call it personal branding and when it really comes to work. And this conversation came about because I call her my podcast muse. There's a young woman that I have periodic conversations with, and she gives me really good ideas, some of which we talk about in the podcast. But she recently got a new job and, she got contacted by a recruiter based on her LinkedIn profile. So I basically said, hey, could you take a look at my LinkedIn profile and could you make some recommendations? Because let me tell you, I am horrible at that thing. I'm not into social media or anything like that. So LinkedIn, I just got on it recently when I was looking for a new job after I came back from Nigeria. Took a career break for a year. Actually, it was like a year and a half, 2 years. But I needed a new job and I didn't want to go back to my previous job. So I ended up creating a LinkedIn profile and I put some information there. And that was helpful for that process. But I was surprised that some people get contacted just off their LinkedIn profile. And, the conversation is a lot different than if you apply through the career portal of those different websites. So the reason why I bring this up, or two things, is what you're saying right now. We're using Zoom to record, right? And I was looking at your, I think it's called the headshots, which I don't have one, but I was looking at your headshot that was like absolutely fantastic. So I'm thinking, you know what? When we do that LinkedIn profile episode, we're going to use mine as the template for conversation. I got some feedback that I'm going to bring out. We're going to critique it, and then I'm going to show the before and after. I might bring you on because you have some of this, you have some really interesting ideas, but also you are fully aware of the personal branding and putting yourself out there, using all the tools to network or having those things speak for you, even when you're not physically present. I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I'll share one extra trick I use. This trick is a little bit out there, but I try to tailor my LinkedIn profile to represent where I want to be in 5 to 10 years. So, for example, I'm trying to break into a new space right now. I'm not in that space, but in my LinkedIn profile, I am describing what I would be doing in those spaces. Now, technically, some people say, well, you're not there yet. And I'll say, well, I'm going to be. And I'm not saying I have a position in those sectors, but I'm explaining what I need to do, because what's happening on LinkedIn is these recruiters, some of them are very hardworking. Some of them are not trying to work hard to find people. They just want to type in a search word. So they just want to say banking and a bunch of names will show up and they will go through your profile. And that's how they find you. So banking was the industry I was going into, and I've described, because I know banking, because that's where I want to go. I know a lot of information that would apply to bankers, investment bankers, general bankers, and I put that in my LinkedIn profile. I always show up when these recruiters are looking for investment bankers or potential interns that they want to pull into the company. And since I show up, I'm always brought into this conversation whether I want to work for an investment bank or not.
Really good point. I have to think about that and use some of those techniques myself. This is pretty good. So let's change the directions a little bit, right? You said earlier that one of the things you were thinking about when you were making that choice of whether or not you want to go, basically you decided you were not willing to go to grad school, right? You said you wanted to go into the workplace. You wanted to understand business. It looks as if you're kind of interested in business, even though you didn't necessarily go to college for business. You went there for engineering. I guess I would like to explore what inspired you, or what was the nuggets that brought your interest to start thinking about business, number one, and how do you think about that, and what are you doing in that space now?
Yeah, so the first person I would mention is a man by the name Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett was somebody I was studying in college. I wanted every young adult to make money as fast as possible, which is not necessarily the case. If it's very fast, it's probably a scam. And I've learned my lesson. I wanted to make money as fast as humanly possible. And I started studying, and I found out that a lot of people in STEM majors make $100,000 to $500,000 a year. A medical doctor makes around that area as well. Now, you can find a seasoned doctor that makes $700,000, $800,000. But once you go over to the Warren Buffetts and the financial guys, these individuals are making $30 million a year, $40 million a year, $50 million. Some people even make $100 million. So I had to make a choice. I said, if I put my time and energy into becoming a seasoned engineer, I'll probably be making $600,000 if I'm the best of the best. But if I'm the best of the best in the financial world, I'll probably be making 20 to 30 million. So I said, okay, let me go in that direction. And I think that was where I kind of started studying people that were in that sector, because, if you want to do something, look for people that have done it before or have done it already. So I started finding these people, studying them, and just implementing whatever I saw they did, or trying to figure out what they've done in the past and try to do it myself. And that was how I just decided that that's where I wanted to go.
I hear what you're saying, but that's kind of looking at financial industry and taking a look at financial products, right? Which is fine, right? Because you kind of talked about, hey, you ended up in the finance industry as well. But are you also doing other things that are like the operational side of business as well? Are you exploring any opportunities in that area?
And can explain what you mean by operational side of business.
For example, there's a difference between me buying and selling stocks, bonds, and other financial instruments versus owning and operating. Well, I went to the Dairy Queen today. I'm going to use that as an example. Owning and operating a Dairy Queen, right? In the sense that in that case, I'm operating the business, and I may not necessarily be working in the business. I have employees that are doing the work, and I'm just an owner taking the profits on the top, right? But it's a different tactic, right? So that one I would consider business. The first one, even if I were in the financial industry and I'm actually doing the work, I wouldn't necessarily consider the business because probably in some cases I may be an employee unless I own the firm. So I'm making that distinction, and that may not necessarily be the right distinction to make. So feel free to correct that as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually disagree with you there slightly, because every business is the same from the perspective that the stock you buy is a business. Just because you don't have any management requirements or experience to add to the company doesn't mean you will not value that stock the same way you value the Dairy Queen down the street. If the Dairy Queen was on the stock, that particular one right next to where you live, it was on the stock market, right? There'll be multiple people that own it, and you would just be buying one stock, two stock, three stock. You don't have to manage it, but it's still a business. So once you have that mentality, I do agree that there's a difference between running and operating a business and just owning the business. There's two different skill types. And lucky for me, like I said, I always try to find areas where I'm lacking at, and that's where I try to go in. And recently I came into ownership of an operational business that requires me to be involved operationally. So I do agree that it's a different skill set from just owning a business and operating it. And right now I'm still learning how to operate to the best of my ability.
So tell me a little bit about that. And before you do, let me actually ask KD a few questions here, because KD is like the true and tried entrepreneur, right? What did I know KD for? If there's an opportunity to explore and there are risks, he doesn't care about the risks. He's going to be willing to explore it. And he's always willing to explore opportunities. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. I'm a little bit more conservative than he is on some of these things. I think my quote unquote investments tends to be more on using financial instruments, stocks primarily, versus KD is willing to do that, but he's also willing to actually set up businesses and explore different things. And that may be businesses here in the US or even businesses back home in Nigeria. So which I think is pretty cool. So KD, I guess one question I would like to ask you would be, from your perspective, how do you think about the difference between operating a company versus just having, whether it's partial or full ownership of a company, but not necessarily having any quote unquote management responsibilities?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it's making me think. And the reason why it's making me think, I think the context also determines the answer to the question. Because if I own a business, but I'm not operating that business, I'm just an investor, right? I would still say I am operating the business from a perspective of knowing the books of the company. Because even though I'm an investor, I'm not in the day to day, I still want to know what the books look like. So I can know early if I need to plan my exit strategy and get my money back before everything goes down the drain. It's just the level of involvement would be different, but the operational requirements will still be there, where I have to still be involved in one way or the other. But the other one, which requires like a day-to-day management, I think it's just all time consuming, in the sense that if I have to operate it on a day-to-day basis, now it goes from it just being an investment to it being something that I have to be working in as an employee in a way. Now, I might not be getting paid as one of the other employees, but because I own it, but because I'm operating it on a day-to-day basis, now I'm not just an owner, I'm also an employee of the company. So in trying to decide which one to go for, I think most money managers would go for the first one, because they don't want to work in any any company. They just want to know I put money here and 2 years from now, I'm going back to cash out. So I think from that perspective, differs because of your level of involvement and what is required of you. But yeah, still, it would be the first option. I think the first option would be more of saying you own the business. But when you start to work in the business, I don't know, it's not just you own it too. You're running the business, you're managing every aspect of it. So that changes the dynamics from that standpoint.
Yeah, the business owns you a little bit. So, yeah, so, all right, take us through at a high level. Like, why did you decide to buy this business, right? What made it appealing? I know you said, hey, you like to grow, right? This was a place that you felt you could grow. So that was one thing to think about. Like, how did you think about the pros and cons of actually making the switch of saying, I'm going to own this business? Number one, tell us a little bit about how long you've owned it for and like what lessons you've learned so far about.
Yeah, of course, definitely. This particular business is an auto repair shop, and I've owned it for about 7 months, almost a year now. And the financial criteria I went through to identify this business, a bunch of different things. And the first thing I wanted to make sure of, because like I said, owning a stock is just like owning a business. And this particular business was just a question of opportunity cost, right? This is just an example. I have 50,000 in the bank and I needed that 50,000 to turn into 200,000. I can buy a big business, McDonald's, NVIDIA, one of these big companies, but the chances of those companies turning 50,000 to 200,000, that is, I think that's a 400% return. That is almost zero, 400%. Even NVIDIA with the hype around it is not growing 400%. But if I own a full business in its entirety, there's an ability for me to get the full amount back. So when I mean the full amount, I can double the valuation of the company. There are different financial tricks you can use to do that. But the chances of you quadrupling or doubling the valuation of a company are higher when you own the entirety of the business.
And let's just clarify something that you said, right? When you said financial tricks, you don't necessarily mean shenanigans. You're meaning you can take advantage of the existing legal structures in place to maximize the value of the business.
That is correct. So when I say financial tricks, the one that comes to mind is you have direct control of the management. If you own a share of NVIDIA, you have no say on how the company is going to move, what direction you want to move in. And I want to preface this, people should always buy things they understand. That's the first thing. Let me mention it. If you don't understand something, then don't even go in that direction. So once you understand something, you know what are the best strategies that you think you can implement to make it bigger, faster, more quicker. So once you have that idea, which is, I know this business, I just need the management to listen to me. So once you own 100% of the company, you can literally take a coffee shop that is worth 200,000 and make it worth 700,000 in the next 2 years if you put the work in. But I cannot do that for NVIDIA. I cannot make NVIDIA worth 20 billion from 2 billion. It doesn't matter how good I am. So your chances of growing really fast are higher when you're dealing with smaller institutions, smaller companies. So that was the first thing I wanted to do. So I have 50,000 in the bank. I can't put it in Microsoft. I can't put it in Apple. What can I put it in? So I started looking around, and the first thing is it has to be small enough that my 50,000 is going to move the needle. It's going to be worth something. And the second thing I wanted to make sure was the business was a high degree of entry. So it has a high barrier of entry. So a coffee shop, somebody else can literally just open up a coffee shop right next door to me. That's a low barrier of entry. So I'm going to have competition, or I probably already have competition in whatever biz doing. So I need to limit the amount of people that can come in to compete. So I started looking for businesses where it takes a huge amount of capital to start. So a repair shop, you need all the equipment, you need the lifts, you need the inspection machine, because everyone needs to get an inspection. Those cost 50,000 on their own. And that was my second criteria. So based on those two criteria, you can literally eliminate almost 60 to 70% of businesses that are available out there. And from there, I just kept paying attention. And then one day I was looking through the list and every auto shop was selling at their actual value. And when I say their actual market value, I mean what somebody else will pay for it. So if you told me you're going to pay me $10 every day, I literally would say, okay, Kola is worth, I don't know, $100 today because he's going to pay me $10 every day, right? But for some reason, this particular auto shop said that they were going to pay me $10, but they said they were selling for $5. That doesn't make any sense. Something is not adding up. So this is a situation where Apple or Microsoft is selling below their market value. That same situation applies to businesses that are not on the stock market, which is why I keep saying that stocks and regular businesses are the same thing. So once you're able to identify a business that's selling below the actual value, for whatever reason, the owner is mismanaging it, or they don't really know the true value of their company, or maybe you're the one actually misvaluing it. Whatever the reason is, there's an opportunity to be made. So I identified that, and I just kept looking until I saw something that didn't add up. Everybody else was here. This company was down here. And I was right. The company was going through some challenges, but they have all the right equipment, all the right customers, but they were just having a slight hiccup. And I went in there, offered my so-called 50,000, and the guy that was involved wanted to get out as quickly as possible. So he sold it to me for far below whatever it was worth. And that's how I was able to get into that business.
Okay, let's kind of go back. You were talking about the list of businesses. I guess the two questions there. Number one is that as you were thinking about making the step of buying the business, were you looking at the different industries and saying, okay, these are the industries I want to go to? Or did you have a list of businesses that were available for sale? And then you were saying, okay, based on the criteria that you mentioned, number one being a high barrier of entry, and then being small enough that you can actually move the needle with your so-called 50,000, and then kind of filtering those businesses based on that list. Like, how did that work? How did you want to find out about this business or this list of businesses to start filtering down till you find the right one?
That's not a bad strategy, actually, but I try to focus on what I understand, what I consider easy for me to understand, because there's no one that's an expert on everything. So if I start looking at everything, my attention is going to be so scattered. So I start off by focusing on what I know. And here's the thing people keep forgetting. You're not going to find an opportunity the moment you walk out the door. You're not going to buy your first lottery ticket and you win $20 million.
How do you know this? I plan on buying lottery ticket today. Don't spoil my mojo.
But if it's your first time, it's not going to happen. I'm just saying right now.
I was going to say, we're traveling interstate and we're hoping to make millions before we got back to Connecticut.
Do that too, by the way. I buy the lottery tickets when I'm going interstate because Connecticut never wins. But
so I was talking about you, actually.
Oh, you're talking about me?
Yeah, I was saying we traveled interstate, remember? And you were buying because we needed to win before we get back to Connecticut.
You know what's funny? You guys are not the only one that do that. I do it as well. Because Connecticut never wins. They never win. So you need to up your chances. Go somewhere else. Go somewhere else.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Please go ahead. You were talking about the businesses and you're talking about focusing on the areas of competence, essentially, right? Focus on the things you understand, because you're not going to hit the jackpots the first time you just walk out the door, right?
Right. So that means the first time you look through the list, you're not going to find something. So it has to be something you have to keep checking. And I don't want to keep checking everybody. I want to focus on what I know I understand and keep checking those over and over again. So I start from there. What do I understand? I understand candies. I understand cars. I understand things that people need or they can't live without. So you need to fix your cars. You need to get your clothes, you need to get your laundry done, laundromats. So I focus on needs instead of wants. And I understand needs. If you need something, you need it. So, and from there, I start looking for mispriced opportunities or something that is causing it to, mispriced opportunities, and find out why it's mispriced. And from there, I hop on it or just ignore it if it doesn't make any sense.
So I'm going to ask you one follow-up question on this, right? So I was having a conversation recently with somebody else, and he was talking about business opportunities, different ones. So one of the things he and I were discussing is, maybe one way to find out how to buy small businesses is to go to like the Chamber of Commerce of the town or city that you're living in, right? Because that may inform you of which businesses may be potentially on the market. And then you can kind of look at that. I don't know if it's effective or not. We've not really tried it yet, but that was just something I had bitball with him to kind of help him with an idea to kind of explore. I guess the question I had for you is, you keep talking about this list, but where is this list coming from? That's really what I'm asking. Like, how did you generate the list?
Yeah, so the list can come from different avenues. There are websites online that offer to sell businesses on behalf of business owners. That was where I got this particular business opportunity from. But the Chamber of Commerce, so when I bought this business, they literally dragged me to the Chamber of Commerce. Every time I get a text, oh, can you come to the Chamber of Commerce event? Can you come to this? Can you come to that? So that is a great way to find these businesses as well. But to me, it's taking away too much of my time. It is a gruesome method of trying to find these business owners that you want to network with. I prefer a motivated seller. And the reason I prefer a motivated seller is because I don't really have 20 million in my bank account. I'm working with limited funds. So I'm looking for someone that can work with me, or someone that is in a situation where they're willing to work with somebody else, right? And those people are always looking for somebody to work with. So by definition, they're putting themselves out there. So they're going to be looking for a broker to list their business. It's like someone that wants to get out of a real estate deal. Like, their parents passed away. They're not going to want to sell the real estate themselves. They're going to find someone that's going to help them sell it. That's a motivated seller. So I tend to focus online lists, any list online, broker websites, small businesses for sale. These websites are where I go because they kind of filter out the non-motivated ones. But if I had time to travel places, go to events, go to Chamber of Commerce events, that would be the way for me to go.
You know the reason why you don't have this 20 million, right? You know the reason. Right? Because you didn't buy this lottery ticket.
I know. I'll try my best next time.
No
Visualize.
worries. I know we're having fun and joke. Let us be clear, right? We do not recommend people buy lottery tickets. Please understand. The odds of winning are so low that we do not recommend it. We're just having a little bit of fun. And I talk to you, the only time I ever buy lottery tickets is if I'm traveling. That's number one. And if the amount is over 500 million. If it's less than that, I don't even bother buying, right? Because I like to fantasize that I might win. People win, obviously, but a lot of people lose their livelihood playing this game. So please understand, I do not recommend buying lottery tickets. I think you should not think of that as your strategy for hitting it big time. So
No calo.
so I guess you decided, hey, you talked about Warren Buffett earlier. He obviously owns businesses, but he also owns stocks in existing companies as well. You talked about that being one of the motivating factors for saying, hey, I want to own my own business as well, own and operate that business. You talked about how you actually found this business and purchased it. First question I had for you, because I've never bought a business before. This is very fascinating to me. I want to ask you everything, but I can't do that in the amount of time that we're going to have today. I guess one question I had is you were talking about them dragging you to the Chamber of Commerce. What was that about? Like you being dragged to the Chamber of Commerce? Why was that the case? What was going on there?
Well, this community, I ended up buying the business, and it's more of a close-knit community. Everyone almost knows each other. And the previous owner was on the Chamber of Commerce board. So by definition, he mentioned, or by extension, he mentioned to me that I should be a member. So I became a member. And from there, they'll always have these events to make sure everyone is involved. And by being involved, you meet other business owners in the community. And the goal is to allow people to partner up. Businesses can partner up if they want to, or just meet other business owners in your community, which is great. And it's an opportunity to meet other people. But at the same time, if I didn't own a business, I would love to be invited to those events as well. But I own a business there, and that's why I say it felt like a drag. But if I was on the other side, it would be a blessing.
Understood. Okay, so you decided you want to pull the trigger on this business. You talked earlier, obviously you don't have $20 million. You had some money. I'm guessing that you didn't necessarily buy this business with all your resources, in the sense that you were able to cover the full asking price. Did you do like seller financing? Did you go the bank route? What was that experience like for you going through that?
Yeah, so I used most of my personal resources first. I exhausted all my personal resources first. There different resources are available to those of us that live in the United States. So the first resource I will say is, as soon as I started working, which goes back to my point on why I wanted to go into the real world. I call it the real world. Going to the matrix as quickly as possible was because you can contribute to your 401k tax-free. And ever since I started my job, I knew I needed to maximize my 401k, but I didn't know why I wanted to maximize it. If that makes sense. I didn't know there was going to be an opportunity 2 years down the road. I just knew if something comes up, I'm going to need this tax-free money. So I just kept plowing every amount I had into it. Didn't know why I was going to use it. And my 401k was able to grow so much. So when I got this opportunity, I was able to take a loan against it. I did not redraw my 401k because you never know when you might need it again. Like I said, this is supposed to be like your ace in the hole. And I took a loan against it. And lucky for me, the loan covered almost 50% of the asking price. And the asking price was not the real price of the business because, like I said,
it was undervalued at the time.
Yeah, the seller was motivated. The seller had a pain point that he wanted to get rid of. So the seller was able to work with me as well and offer seller financing. So those two amounts come together to equal the amount the seller seller wanted to collect in cash.
Mhm.
So I was able to take a loan against my 401k, and I had a real estate property as well. And because at that period in time, we just came out of COVID, the federal government was decreasing interest rates so people can trade more, do businesses more.
Mhm.
And because the interest rate was so low, I said, you know what, this is so low, I have to take advantage of this. So I took a small loan against my property as well, right? So the loan, because the interest rate was so low, the monthly payment came down to less than, I don't know, $400 a month. And that amount plus the loan against my 401k and the amount I've saved, plus the seller was very willing to offer seller financing, I was able to get the required amount to acquire the business.
Oh, that's awesome. I have some follow-up questions for you. Let me ask one more, and then I want to ask a question for KD as well, because KD, I want you to start thinking about this, but I'm curious, have you ever bought the business before, KD? I know you do a lot of different interesting things, so you were the first person that I would ask.
I wouldn't call it a business because I'm more in technology. I've bought a software, a SaaS business before.
You bought a SaaS business?
Yes.
Not just the software?
Not just a software.
Oh, really?
A SaaS business. But everything is online. So we don't see them the way anyone who's buying like a physical store or location business see them. We just see them as a product. Because you don't actually have face-to-face interactions, it changes the perspective because you just go to an online, just like you said, a broker platform where the seller would list their business and say, hey, I have this software and it has this number of users and it's generating XYZ. And you buy, you don't even sometimes even have a phone conversation with the seller.
Okay.
So that's why it's a little bit different. And we do that because we prefer a sit and leave business where just let it grow and make the money. So yeah, that I've done, but not any physical location-based business.
Good to know. Good to know. You've been holding out on me, man. You didn't tell me this story. I'm interested in this.
Well, I don't tell the stories when the business don't start to yield the money it's supposed to yield. So it's not the story I want to tell.
Okay. So, all right, I had a question about I wanted some clarity. You talked about taking a loan against your 401k. So I'm aware that you can take loans from your 401k, basically. And in that situation that I just talking about right now, what happens is that your 401k essentially gets reduced by the amount of the loan. You essentially pay yourself back, and there's a specific interest rates that you have to pay yourself back. And I think usually those loans are like 5 years or less. I don't know. Different 401k administrators may have different things. Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about a situation where you go to a third-party bank and you say, hey, I have this 401k asset that's valued this much. This is the statement. This is all the information. Could you give me a loan for X amount? In which case, you're not necessarily withdrawing any amount from your 401k at all. That's still growing at whatever the market rate is or whatever you set it at. But you have this loan that is essentially backed by the 401k. Which of those two options did you do?
Yeah, I would say the first option is the one I went with. I took the loan via our system administrator, and from there, in which it works out in my favor. I don't need the money. I don't need the money anytime soon. And the interest rate was low. And the interest rate is basically going back to my pocket, which I can borrow against in the future. And there were a lot of other factors as well that played into me taking a loan against the 401k. But yeah, it was the first option I used.
So, all right. So you find this motivated seller, you pulled together all your resources, you buy this business. There was a portion of it that was financed by the seller. So it's day one, you bought the business, you signed these documents, the ink is dry. Even if it's still wet, the seller grabbed it from you so quickly. So now you're responsible for the business. How many employees are in the business? Like, that's the first question. Who was going to be essentially your steward, right? Because you were not going to leave your day job to go sit down in this business and start running it. You were going to be running it essentially remotely. Right. Tell me a little bit about that, what your thinking is, what systems were you thinking about maybe possibly making, things like that. Like, tell me a little bit about how that went.
Yes, what the prior owner ran it remotely as well. So that was another factor that played a major role in me acquiring it. I was like, if he can do it, I should be able to do it. He's running remotely. The business is running on its own. But what I did not anticipate was how big of a hole the last seller was in, right? I knew there was a hole, but you never know how big it is until
you're in it.
Right, exactly. So once I got in there, there were 2 employees. One of them was full-time and the other one was semi-full-time. And the 2 employees ran the place Monday to Friday. I paid the salary of the full-time employee. The full-time employee paid the salary of the semi-full-time employee. That was how it worked. So
explain that. That doesn't make sense to me. So you pay the salary of one employee and the other employee pays the salary of the
other employee. So the other employee
part-time employee.
Yeah, he's part-time.
Okay. But usually you don't have that scenario happen, right? You don't have a scenario where you are paying somebody and he's paying somebody else.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So whatever the business makes in a week,
Yep.
right, has to be more than what we're paying the employees.
Yep.
Now, when you're salaried, regardless of what the business does, you still have to pay the salaried employee.
Yep.
The part-time employee is a different case. He only works if there's work to do.
Okay.
So I don't have to deal with him. Whoever is running the shop is the one in charge of calling him in to work.
Okay.
Or sending him home, and he's also involved in paying him whatever he works. He's the one in charge of keeping track of all of that.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so that makes sense. Okay, so continue. So we find this scenario going on. The hole, was it the hole? What was the hole? Was the hole that the employees hadn't been paid for a few months and they needed to get paid? Or was it something else?
That would be a breach of contract. But no, the prior owner it was a weird situation. So the prior owner had a son, and he bought the business for his son. And the son didn't understand anything about business. And he ran it into the ground. Then we found out that the dad also had a little bit of an attitude problem. A lot of customers claimed that he was not very friendly. So you could say father and son ran the business to the ground. Who knows? But the son didn't know anything about business. The guy only cared about money.
Yep.
I was told the first day he came in, he bought an ATM machine and put it by the door. I was like, why would he do that? That's just going to scare people away. Like, that's just, what is he doing? But they basically had bad relationship with customers. And like I said, that town was a little bit small.
Yep.
Word goes around, and the next thing you know, you lost 40
all
to
the
50%
customers
of your recurring customers.
Yep.
Right. So when I came in, first thing I had to do was cut my costs, right? Make sure that everybody that's getting paid or every service we're paying for, either we reduce it, completely get rid of it, or we watch it every single day. Then the next thing was I literally got on the phone and called every customer I could find an invoice for and let them know that there's a new owner in town. We're not the same person. Just give them some sort of clarity or confirmation that it's completely different. We would like to meet you in person. And I think we got about 60% of those people back.
That's awesome.
Some people claim that he moved. I don't believe it, but we tried to get everybody back, which was not possible. But we got a lot of people back. And that's how I was able to find out what had transpired, because when I got on the phone saying, why aren't you coming back? And they're telling me this person yelled at me, this person did this. So the first step was, and this is my door-to-door sales coming into effect here, literally got on the phone, called them, sent them a gift. I had to do whatever it takes to just get them to respond positively to a new management. So first lesson, you need to know how to sell. But then now I just need to manage the employees as well, because now the employees are worried. There's a new management in town. Are we going to get rid of everybody at the shop? I had to come up with different strategies to solve that problem. So one of the employees didn't even want to listen to new management. This is how I've been doing it. I'm sure you've heard this. This is how we do things. I don't really care if you're the new owner, or this is how we've been doing things. Well, I already got your replacement. Yeah. Next thing you know, they're back in line. So there are different steps I was implementing to let them know I'm not their enemy, because sometimes you just think you're just somebody that comes from the outside to shake things up, right? Once you own something 100%, you have control of the management of the company. So I had to let them know that I'm not their enemy. And that took a while. You're losing money left and right, and your employees think you're the enemy. You're trying to convince customers that it's a new management. Yeah, a lot of different moving parts, and which is why, going back to your question, what's the difference between just owning the business and managing the business? It's completely two different skills. But you need someone to finance your operational stuff while you're trying to get things under control. So both of them are important, but the operational part is definitely a skill I would recommend everyone.
So I guess first question is, this employee that you were having trouble with and you had to essentially change their mindset, how did you deal with that? Was it by essentially telling him or her, listen, you better shape up, or you need to step up? But in your case, because you're remote, you kind of need them there, I would imagine, right? It's not as easy as if you were there in person. And then two is, you talked about door-to-door sales and how that contributed to you trying to get some of these customers back. Did you actually go to the shop and maybe spend a weekend in that area just so that you can visit those customers, talk to them and address address their concerns, or were you able to accomplish bringing them back just by phone calls and emails and things like that?
Oh, no, definitely not by virtual methods. I slept in the shop, let's put it that way,
Okay.
for multiple days. I literally slept in the shop for multiple days, trying to figure out what I needed to do to bring certain employees back on track. So the main employee, he was fine regardless, whoever took over. It was the other dude. I think he felt that I was now going to start paying attention to what he's doing at the shop and what he's
Yep.
doing in his free time. And it just didn't feel comfortable. And there's also a question of race involved in all this aspect of things, because the last owners were all completely white, and they kept telling me to get rid of the black guy so they can get a white dude. And I was like, okay, why should I get rid of the dude? But they wouldn't give me a reason. They're like, oh, he's lazy, he's lazy. The white dude was the one disrespectful. I'm confused. The black dude was listening, but the white dude is disrespectful. But they told me the black dude was the lazy one. So it was really tough. I had a lot of help, right? One thing I did fail to mention was it wasn't just me involved. I have a partner who is my brother, and he focused on all the documentation and all the paperwork that we had to do post-closing, while I focused on the relationship aspect. I reached back out to the owners to come back and help me reestablish those relationships with the employee. And one of the owners was trying to get me to get rid of the black employee and keep the white dude. I told him to help me create a relationship with the disrespectful employee. And from there, things started easing out and we came to a middle ground and things are going well. But I had a lot of help, because you need to be able to tap into people that have relationships already. And he sounded like that dude and the prior owners had a great relationship, and he felt like I was going to come in and ruin it. And the other dude, the full-time employee, he was fine with it. Maybe he was excited that someone that looks like him is running the shop now. So don't know what the situation there, but the first guy was pretty fine with it. The second guy, we had to work on that relationship, and here we are.
Okay, so let's kind of get to course wrapping up this conversation a little bit related to the shop. It's very interesting. We can go in a lot of different areas, but I want to be mindful of time right now. But I guess the question I would ask is, you've now owned the shop for 7 months, right? Where
Yeah.
would you say you are at in that journey? Is the shop moving in a positive direction? Is it stable now? And then the other thing I also want to know is, one of the things that I think about, and I'm thinking about it from the perspective of running businesses on the continent. I'm going to use Nigeria as an example. This is probably not the same in every single country, but Nigeria specifically, is there is always this concern about theft that is conducted by the employees, right? The employees are always trying to find a way to kind of game the system, even though you are fulfilling your obligations to them. One could argue maybe you needed to pay them more, but it seems to me that it doesn't really matter what you pay them. They're always looking for opportunity to either do zero work and get paid, or find things they can steal and stuff from the company. Given that you're running this business remotely, is that a problem that you encountered? That's number one. And how did you and the previous owners kind of deal with this?
Yeah, so the previous owners, there are multiple previous owners. So the guy that started it all, the founder, he is the one I reached out to help mend the relationship with the
Okay.
employee. Now, I just want to clarify, the owner that sold the business to me, they're the ones that ran into the ground.
Yep. So you didn't go back
Yeah.
to them for help.
No, there's no way. That literally point poison in my food.
Yep.
But the founder, he felt like they did him wrong by running the business to the ground. So he
Yep.
definitely wanted to help me build it back up. But he was always there watching the employees. He ran the invoice and receipt section of the business.
This
He
was when
saw
he owned the business,
when
right?
he owned the business. Yeah.
Yep.
If I had my way, I would bought the business and had him run it in interim until he wanted to completely retire instead of, because the last previous owners literally just got rid of him and just took over. But that would have been the way I wanted to do it. But the business is equipped with so many different cameras, and I pay attention to what's going on. When it comes to theft, it's cash or credit. Credit, it's impossible for them to steal from the business. When a customer comes in, regardless of what is done, they have to pay with their card, right? And you would probably say, okay, what if they just make up a job? Well, the money is still coming into the business, whatever
Yep.
they make up. On the sell side, I was explaining this to Holiday, that if the business is so segmented, the parts company is completely separate from our business. So we have to order parts from a third party.
Mhm.
And that account is connected to my phone.
Mhm.
So every time a new owner comes in, they take over each vendor account.
Mhm.
So if a part is ordered, I have to be able to say that amount that was charged to my account, I need to be able to tie a transaction at the shop to that charge on my account. So that's how I'm able to verify if a credit card transaction is valid or not.
Mm.
There's 3 people involved, unless they're in cahoots with all the parts department, which is impossible. That's too much to steal $20. But on the cash side, that's where it's a lot more difficult. So the previous owner, what he usually does is by the end of the day, every day, he tells the employee to let him know how much cash they have each day. And that's how he makes sure that no cash ends up missing by the end of the week.
Mm.
So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday has to add up by the end of the week to what the cash that we have in the system. And I continue that system. But sometimes cash go missing. Sometimes I catch the employees trying to sneak one by me. Every time I catch them, it shows my system is working. I like to believe that. For example, someone will charge like a $10 stuff, expecting me not to see it. But if
Yep.
I do see it, he's going to say, oh, it's just $10.
Mhm.
So they also understand that you can't be stealing $200, $300. If it was $2, $10, I'm fine with it, right? They
Mhm.
understand that. So there's mutual understanding because they feel like I'm doing this, doing that. I should deserve a $10 oil change or filter, right? Which is fine by me. As long as, the bulk of the money is still there, I wouldn't fuss too much about $10 missing here, $15 missing there. So those are the systems in place that we've seen work with the employees.
Okay. And as far as the condition of the business now, how would you say it is? Is it getting better? Is it stable? Like, where are you in that journey of trying to get the business to go in the right direction?
It's definitely getting better. I've learned so much about time management, managing employees, marketing. I've learned so much. When I was trading stocks or whatever you want to call it, making 50%, I didn't learn anything. Now I'm seeing how businesses go from 10 to 20, all the different steps. But I will say we are out of the hole we were in prior to me taking over. I was just doing the financial report for the company 2 days ago, and I was looking at the numbers, and the revenues are increasing. So I will say we're moving in the right direction. We just recently got out of the hole. Every amount that we're making is paying for every expense we were incurring. So
Mm.
that is a good position because when we took over, the expenses were way more than the income because there was no basically customers. But now we're even, and I would hope the numbers keep increasing if we keep doing what we're doing and nothing changes in the negative direction. We're definitely level right now, and the goal
Mhm.
is to keep climbing.
Good. 2 things. Number one, as you were saying earlier, that when you were trading stocks making 50%, you need to teach me and Colade this technique. We are going to come for classes. Uh, to figure out this stock technique. No, well, I don't trade stocks, but I do buy. When you say
Yeah,
trade, I'm assuming it's
yeah.
short term.
No, I
But
don't do I don't do the short term. Sorry. I was thinking about not using that word, but when I buy stocks, it's easy to make 50% with small amounts of money,
mm,
right?
but
But it,
you need to teach us our technique because I've not gotten to the point where I'm making 50%. Sometimes I make 50%, sometimes I make negative 20%. So we need to have a conversation. Maybe we'll have that one. But the other thing I think too is that, there's so many lessons that you've learned on the business that I think is just absolutely fantastic. I really like to talk to you about some of those things, even learn just for my benefits alone. I'm sure Kolade probably knows some of these things as well, although his space is different, right? He tends to deal in technology and internet and software kind of space. It will be interesting to have a conversation so I can kind of glean some knowledge here that I can apply in my life. So that's pretty cool.
I just want to say, even Holiday, if you deal with people, I think people are the most difficult and the most rewarding people to deal with. If you deal with people, it doesn't matter. One lesson that I think everyone experiences is do not take everything everyone says as face value. Literally, I did not understand people's intention. Like someone come up to you and say, hey, listen, Holiday is doing this and that. And you're going to be like, oh, okay. I mean, I've seen Holiday do this and that. But you need to understand the intention why they're telling you Holiday is doing X and Y. I did not realize that. It took me like a few mistakes to realize that they also add their their agenda, why they're telling me X and Y is doing it. And I was like, oh my God, I thought this guy was a third party. You're literally a third party. What do you mean you have an agenda? So in business, everyone has an agenda. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay. I was just thinking, like, one of the things I've noticed was that in Connecticut specifically, I'd seen a lot of auto repair shops, right? But I'd never seen one that was owned by a black person. Usually it is owned by a different race, and then you have black people working in that shop. I would be curious to know if you know at all, like, what is the percentage of auto shops that are actually owned by black people? I'm guessing if you go to places that are predominantly black, like Atlanta or whatever, they probably may have more of that. So maybe we should narrow it to the Northeast if there's any data there. I don't know if you have that information at all. If you do, share it. But regardless of that, you've had a lot of experiences with going to high school here in the US, going to college here in the US, becoming a professional, going to the workforce. Now you also have the experience of actually being a business owner and buying jobs. I said buying jobs, buying a business. The question I have for you would be, what lessons learned would you want to pass on to somebody else who may be in any one of those steps in their journey, right? Somebody who just migrated to the US, whether a parent that has kids that are going into the school system, or maybe the kid himself or herself that's going through the school system, maybe going to college, maybe becoming a professional for the first time, or maybe even at the point where they're saying, okay, you know what, I need to do some investing, I'm doing stocks, but let me go buy a business as well. What are the lessons learned or the key themes that you would say somebody should keep an eye on?
Yeah, that's a great point you brought up and a great question. And you said, what are the key tips to pay attention to? And the answer is literally in that question, because there's a word called perspicacious, right? And that word means the ability to pay attention. I've walked by millions of dollars, but I wasn't paying attention. I didn't even know that was going on. Going back to, I don't want to use this example, but I'm going to use it. I'm walking to a grocery store and I stare at these scratch-off tickets on the side. And the day I walked through that grocery store, the winning scratch-off ticket was literally right there. Someone that came after me bought the ticket and went up with the winnings. But if I was paying attention to lottery tickets across my town region, I would know that there's a winning scratch-off somewhere there. So I will say the biggest skill anyone that's coming up needs to develop the ability to pay attention. Just be aware, just be aware of stocks are going up, stocks are going down. Just be aware of universities that are engaging in engineering programs, because that you might meet the future Mark Zuckerberg there. That's where those kids want to go. But if you're not paying attention, you're not going to see the opportunity. That's the biggest thing. You need to pay attention. You need to be perspicacious. You need to always look around you and say, what could I glean from this information? What could I make sense of from what I'm seeing here? So the first thing is to be perspicacious. And the other thing is just surround yourself with people that are doing what you want to do or have done it already. As soon as I walked into that situation I described for this business, the first thing I wanted to do is find people that have done it before. So I reached out to the founder who built the business from scratch. Find people that, have done what you want to do or are doing what you're going to do, because, iron sharpens iron, and those people are going to allow you to, your ideas are going to clash, but they're going to allow you to see things in different lights that you didn't see before. So those two things, being perspicacious and surround yourself with people that are like-minded or are doing what you want to do. I would say those two are my biggest takeaway from running those businesses.
Understood. Thanks for coming online. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. This was absolutely fantastic. Learned a lot. I've actually taken to myself, like, you know what? I need to go start thinking about buying a business.
Thank you. I can get him to open his checkbook now.
Yeah. Like Colin and I've been having conversations. Some of the conversations I tell him, no, it was not something, right? I just tell him, no, I don't want to hear anymore. But so this was absolutely fantastic. And one of the things that I thought was really key, we didn't really talk about it, but one of the things I thought was really key for me was what you said about you and your brother essentially tag teaming and handling different part of the business, right? You had a problem to solve. You guys got together, you collaborated, and you actually started doing that. And one of the things I don't see us doing very well is actually people getting together, people within our community getting together to collaborate on things that have to do with money. We collaborate on parties, right? Collaborate on social events and all that kind of stuff. And even some of that turns into fights. But, when it comes to do with money, I don't see us collaborating. And I thought that was absolutely fantastic. Kudos to you and your brother for doing that. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I wish you all the best with this business. When you decide you want investment or you want to buy the next business, give me a call. I'm interested.
Oh, I'm looking right now. You always have to just keep looking, because the opportunity is not going to jump out at you. So I'm always looking. I was talking to someone today and they have these Facebook groups Apparently, they talk about businesses on those Facebook groups. I'm not necessarily interested, but I want to hear the conversation as well. So it's always good to just know what's going on. So I'm always looking. I'm always looking. The opportunity just hasn't jumped out at me yet.
Yeah, that's good to know. So, Kolade, Ori has been talking about his business and things like that, but you told me this new story that I had never heard before about this SaaS business you bought. Was this new information for me? You have this SaaS business that you bought. I guess tell me a little bit more about this business. We'll kind of wrap up with that kind of conversation. I wanted to know about the business, number one. What are the lessons you've learned, number two? And what would you do differently next time?
Good question. It is not really a story because the business didn't last long enough to have a story.
Okay.
But the experience was because it's all technology based. I bought this SaaS business that showed all the numbers and all the numbers looked good. What I didn't know, which I realized afterwards, was those numbers were deducted. And this was after I've paid. Because I was able to get access to actually check the dashboard. I was able to see numbers. It was right after I then tried to do like a welcome email just to get the onboarding phase started, that I was getting zero response. And I was like, that's not supposed to be. It's just sure that there was a transaction like 2 weeks before I bought it.
Yep.
It was then that I started realizing that things were off. So I reached out to, back then we were always using escrow for transactions.
Yep.
So I reached out to escrow and then I reached out to the broker site and they said, well, the reason why they give the days that they allow for due diligence is just so you can check the information and make sure everything was good before you pay, which I did, which showed that all the information was good. But it wasn't. And then the seller also became non-responsive afterwards. And that's when I knew that I bought the zoo. So...
They scammed the Nigerian. This is not funny. This is funny, but not funny. I'm sorry. Did you take any legal action?
No, this was an Asian seller. It wasn't someone in the US. And because again, when you go through these broker sites, it's hard to pinpoint someone's identity. I don't know what kind of identification they used. So typically, the broker site should be the one taking legal actions to help you as the buyer. But they also don't want to get involved because they want to plead the fifth.
The brokers got paid too. That's what I'm familiar with.
Oh yeah, they will take their own percentage.
They already took their percentage. So I don't think they want to fight.
Is the broker like a US company?
Oh yeah.
Can you sue the broker in that case? In that or no?
Well, they would say, because typically there's a checkbox. You have to go back on the platform and check the checkbox. To say you've checked the data. Which the data is good. It's just like the data is not real people.
Oh my Lord. I'm sorry, man. This is not funny. I realized that obviously when it happened, you didn't think it was funny, but it's funny in retrospect.
Yeah, in retrospect. It actually came up, and I was telling this to Ore earlier today. I was at an angel investor. I mentioned that to you in one of our past episodes. Angel Investor Forum here in Connecticut. The City Innovation is what they call them. And the guy who presented was actually talking about the reason why they don't actually invest a whole lot into technology businesses, even when you can show them data that you have a user base and you have engagement, you have transactions. They don't. And when he was saying that, I knew why he was saying it. Which was why I had to take the guy who invited me to go with him, who owns a payment processing company, a software, because he's looking for investment. And he thought, oh, just because he has a good software, they're going to invest. And I had to approach the angel investor that presented, and I told him, hey, we have a platform. It does this, it does that. What do you think we need to present to you guys to make you guys invest? The first thing he asked me is, are you guys making actual money? That was the first thing he asked. And can you show revenue for a whole fiscal year, which means you've done your taxes, you have books to actually show actual revenue. And we're like, no, this is just a new business. It's like, no, we're not interested. And I said, okay, what if we have maybe some users who are currently using this, but we're not making money yet? I said, no, we're not interested. And I did that intentionally because I wanted him to hear from someone else, because if I was telling him, he might think maybe I'm just trying to be pessimistic and not trying to encourage him. Because I've been that road before, where I thought all I needed was just a platform that shows user activity in terms of transactions, and I'm good to go. And I think he experienced that too, because after he bought this from a music guy who wasn't interested in the technology or the software because he wanted to focus on his music.
Mhm.
And then that guy also showed him that they were users. But what he didn't realize, which he now found out afterwards, was the users that were using this like 5-10 years ago, they've moved on. But the data showed that they were users, and it was still like
Yep.
some transactions a few months ago
Yep.
that all he needed to do was like, rekindle the interest.
Yep.
Nah, it didn't work that way. So user based, I think, was something that was working in the past. Now it doesn't work anymore. When you're buying a business, actual books that shows your tax returns and everything is what we need to see. So actually be sure that you're making money.
I'm very interested in this software. I smell an opportunity, but if you can start to hijack the podcast, Katie, sorry, if you can give me more information on this person, because the person is just as important as the product, I'd be interested in this software.
The software? Oh, you're talking about the payment processing software?
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. He's an older guy. He's Caucasian. And I think he would fall into the category of the kind of people you're looking for because he got laid off. It was my former colleague. So he's currently looking for a job or an opportunity to move his business to the next level so that can generate some revenue for him.
If you end up buying this company, or I want a broker fee.
I don't know if I'm going to buy it. I'm thinking about a partnership.
Let me change it. If you end up talking to this individual,
and lucky for you already, he actually is in West Haven too. So is in your corner.
It's all cool, brothers.
But that was why you never heard about the story of this business, because it didn't end up becoming a story worth telling.
You know what? I think failures are just as good as successes because you learned a lot from this experience. And I think that's really fantastic, right? And it goes back to something Aurea was talking about, paying attention, right? In this case, it was paying attention during the due diligence phase to make sure that you are looking at the right things. Right, not just a bunch of data that has already been collected and fabricated in this case. But that was absolutely awesome. So, brothers, it's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed the conversation. All right, next time we're talking about business entrepreneurship, we're going to bring you back. Kolade and I usually have like a fantasy session for some of our podcasts where we just talk about random ideas or things to do on the continent. Maybe you could be a good person to bounce some of these things off to let us know, hey, you guys are stupid. What are you thinking about? You think about something that does this, but that's absolutely cool. So I really appreciate you guys coming on tonight. This was pretty fun chat to have.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Aurea. Yeah, you were saying, Aurea.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. This is very exciting. And I usually say that, in order for people to partner, you want to be on the same level. You want to have some high level conversation. And, I was able to see a lot of different experiences Kolade has gone through already from this conversation. Which makes him a great partner, by the way. Because if you have not done it, it's really hard to drag someone with you up a ladder or wherever you want to go because they will not see things. But I really appreciate this conversation and you as well, Kala, as well. Because we've had a conversation at the train station and I could tell immediately, which is why I decided to do this podcast based on that conversation we had at the train station. So I would love to continue this conversation. I think it would help me, help your listeners as well, and thanks for having me as well.
I'm writing you this letter and letting you know that my brother, he go better, he done better. I'm writing you this letter and letting you know that my sister, he go better, he done better. Said it's gonna get better, my brother. Sister